welcome everybody to this School of Public Policy, Policy and Practice seminar, and jointly with the Constitution Unit at UCL on choosing future MPs, candidate selection for the upcoming UK elections. My name's Meg Russell. I'm a Professor of British and Comparative Politics in the Department of Political Science at UCL and Director of the Constitution Unit, and it's a great pleasure to be chairing this panel with three very excellent speakers. By coincidence, I was actually teaching candidate selection last week to my comparative politics students who study parliaments and political parties. And I'm not sure it's something that many people give a great deal of thought to, really. It was famously described, in academic circles, famously, as the secret garden of politics in the late 1970s, because it goes on largely, or did at least then go on largely behind closed doors. But it can be enormously important for political outcomes. So in a system such as ours, but not just our system, it can be very, very important in proportional representation systems as well. But in a system such as ours, where you have individual constituencies, where voters can really only choose between one person for each of the main parties, and on top of that, many seats are effectively safe seats, held election after election by one political party, largely the Conservatives or Labour, and therefore many people are going to get a Conservative or Labour MP almost certainly no matter how they vote. In effect, when the party chooses the candidate, they've chosen the MP. And yet, these are decisions that go on behind the scenes to a large extent. They are entirely unregulated by law. There's nothing telling parties how they have to select their candidates. This has gone a bit weird. There are no rules telling parties how they need to select their candidates. And this is the case actually not just in the UK, but all over the world. And because it's such an important process, it's generally very hard fought inside political parties. It's often one of the most controversial matters inside political parties, not only the selection of individual candidates, but the system itself. How the system for candidate selection ought to be run is often very controversial. So we're here tonight to talk about candidate selection in the UK, and we have got a fantastic panel of speakers to throw some light on how these relatively little-known processes work. Michael Crick is doing amazing work on this. Michael has been a broadcaster, journalist, and author for decades. And after 40 years as a television journalist, he recently started the Twitter account @Tomorrow's MPs, where he is cataloguing the selections painstakingly in all of the winnable seats for the main parties for the forthcoming general election. And if you haven't gone to that Twitter account, I would strongly recommend it. It's an amazing amount of work. I hope you're going to tell us how you do it, as well as perhaps what motivates you to do it. I have a feeling that Michael has a head full of so much fascinating information, not just from that, but from all of his years monitoring politics in general, that we could be here all night. So I should try and keep him to time a little bit, but everything he has to say is going to be fascinating. The last thing to say is that he's, of course, the author of many books, many books of a wonderful quality. And his most recent book is One Party After Another, The Disruptive Life of Nigel Farage, for all of those who want to know more about Nigel Farage. Our second speaker, although actually maybe Luke, you're going to go second actually.
I think so, yeah.
You two agreed between you, yeah. So our second speaker will be Luke Akehurst, who's been a Labour Party activist since 1988. He's a member of Labour's ruling National Executive Committee, which is the party's governing body and of course oversees the rules for candidate selection, among other things. It sets the overall strategic direction of the party. He's been on the NEC since 2020, but also served on it previously from 2010 to 2012, and has done many other things over a very long time in the Labour Party. And our third speaker is Charlotte Carew-Pole, who's a British women's rights advocate and Conservative political activist. She's the director of Women to Win, which campaigns for increasing the number of women Conservative members of Parliament in the House of Commons. And It has to be said, you've got a little bit of catching up to do on Luke's party. But you're going to tell us how you're doing. And of course, the demographic mix of candidates is one of the really important aspects because, as I say, when the parties pick the candidates, they're often picking the MPs. And so if they're not demographically balanced, you're not going to get a demographically balanced House of Commons. So what you're doing is very important. She's also the founder and director of Daughters' Rights, which is a political campaign advocating for the end of male primogeniture. So we've been on a platform before talking about the House of Lords. So the way we're going to run this is each of the speakers will take about 5 minutes for some opening remarks in that order. We're then going to have a little discussion between us as a panel for maybe 20 minutes or something like that, but we will open the floor to your questions, leaving plenty of time for questions from the floor. This whole session, including the Q&A session, is being recorded and it will be posted online afterwards on the department's website and YouTube channel and our podcast after the event. So bear that in mind that if you speak, you will be on the recording. And if you don't want to be on the recording, then pass your question to somebody else or something like that. We'll let you know when the recording's available after the event and we hope you might want to share it with others. That is more than enough from me. You're all here to listen to our speakers. I'm going to pass first to Michael Crick.
Thank you very much indeed, Meg. I've been obsessed with this subject, for 50 years, really, ever since I was first interested in politics as a schoolboy in the early 1970s. I actually took part in a Labour Party selection when I was in the Labour Party in 1974. We were presented with one candidate and duly endorsed him. That was in a hopeless seat called Hazel Grove outside Stockport. And I later on took part in a Conservative open primary in the area where I live in Battersea. And we had a very high-powered lineup of James Cleverly, Louise Mensch, Sam Geemer and Jane Ellison, and it was Jane who actually got chosen, and I filmed all that for Newsnight, but I've made loads of films for Newsnight and Channel 4 News about this process, in particular the last-minute selections. That's where all the fiddling and fixing goes on. And if you talk to any MP, or anybody who's even tried to be an MP, they've all got selection stories about how it was all, the one they thought was a dead cert suddenly crumbled at the last moment and someone intervened or they made a rubbish speech. And then others, they end up getting one. They didn't turn up and didn't expect to get it. They thought it was just practice. And because they're so relaxed, perhaps, I don't know, they make a great speech and they get selected. These days is actually a lot harder, I think, particularly in the Labour Party, to win a selection on a good speech. But Conservative Party, maybe. Now, it was, I think at least 10 years ago, I tried to set up an academic unit. I think it was at UCL, actually, along these lines. And that didn't get anywhere. I tried Manchester, where I was on the Board of Governors for a while. And then I thought, I'm never going to get these people to agree. I'm just going to go ahead and do this thing tomorrow's MPs. And, in fact, in a way, I should have called it Tomorrow's MPs and Ministers. Because one of the many reasons why this is important is that in our political system, the people who are elected as MPs are also the pool of people from whom ministers are chosen. And I think that's vitally important. I reckon, I don't know, I've never seen a figure for this, but I reckon at least half of MPs end up serving as a minister or a whip at some point in their parliamentary career. So it isn't, in my view, just a matter of finding somebody who's good at dealing with constituency problems and going to represent the constituency in Parliament. I think there are much wider responsibilities on an MP than just that. And yet, this process, as you've said, Meg, is done amid extraordinary secrecy in this country. It used to get quite a lot of coverage in the local press, and some local papers would give enormous detail. One or two still do, actually. The one in Carlisle's very good, for example. But in most cases, people are chosen for safe seats, often, And it's not mentioned anywhere, or in the local press, or even on social media in some cases. And that seems to be extraordinary when, effectively, if they're elected for a safe seat, and if the boundary changes in future go the right way, they may well have that safe seat for 30 or 40 years. And it seems to me that we need to put a lot more scrutiny into the people who are coming forward to try and become members of Parliament. And if there was a lot more scrutiny before they're chosen as candidates, we might get rid of some of the crooks and duds that seem to be proliferating at the moment. And I just think it's also the right thing to do. I regard the candidate selection process in this country as akin to the primary process in America. Primaries in America aren't just about the candidates for the presidency. There are primaries taking part at every level in the American political system, and they are very, very public events involving registered members of registered Republicans and registered Democrats. And I think the selection process in this country should be a lot more public, and there should be a lot more public scrutiny. Now, it varies between the parties. Right now, actually, the Labour Party are probably the most open because they actually advertise on their website, we've got the following selections, you've got a week to put in your application, although they actually announced they were selecting for Wellingborough yesterday and said the deadline was noon today, so people only had 24 hours for Wellingborough. But then you can follow the process through, and contenders for Labour selections often announce it on Twitter. They often put out public videos, websites, and all of that, although they do rather less of that, I've noticed in this round, rather less than they were doing a year ago. In contrast, the Conservative process is very, very secretive, and there are severe penalties for people who talk to journalists about it. So you have to get from inside the process, people to leak to you the latest seats that are being selected. They tend to do them in batches, announce about 20 batches every 6 weeks or so. And then you've got to follow up and find local people who will tell you what's going on, tell you about the long list, the short list, who's going to the selection meeting. In Labour's case, they allow voting by post and online sometimes. In the Conservative case, the selection, the final choice is at a selection meeting. But horrifically, some of these selection meetings in the Conservative Party are extraordinarily badly attended. I mean, about 6 weeks ago, the Conservatives chose a candidate in South Norfolk, which is a Conservative seat, and I think will remain a Conservative seat no matter what happens at the election. There were 30 people at that selection. The other night, I think it was on Sunday, in Chloe Smith's seat. In other words, it's a Conservative seat right now. Admittedly, it's a marginal. But first of all, they only had one applicant to start with, and they had to run the process again to get some more applications. And at the actual selection, which took place on Sunday, there were two reports on this. One report is there were 20 people there, and the other is there are 17. Anyway, either way, it wasn't very many for choosing somebody for a seat which is currently held by the Conservative Party. The trends, well, I'll briefly talk about this. When it comes to the sort of traditional things on which we judge this, numbers of women, Labour's, I've been away for a couple of weeks, so I haven't updated the figures, but Labour is roughly 44% women. They've got a crazy system in Scotland whereby they put two seats together and do a selection process whereby you select one man and one woman. The Conservatives are around about 25% women, and it's even worse when you look at the seats that realistically they can win. So they're very concerned about it. Indeed, Rishi Sunak said that his wife did an event at the Conservative conference where he said his wife was badgering him all the time about this, and they've actually started introducing all women shortlists in the Conservative Party, which Labour can't do these days for legal reasons. Ethnic minorities, yeah, both parties are doing pretty well on that. Labour's got a real problem selecting black men. There's only a couple so far. In fact, well, one of them's arguably not really a black man because he's partly Asian, partly black, partly white. And then there's another one in Croydon. So, I mean, Labour's had terrible difficulty getting black men for winnable seats for the last 10 years. And the number of working class candidates is tiny. I mean, Labour have got about 6, the Tories a couple. It's gone down and down and down at every election. And the big factor right now, bigger than ever, is candidates being local. And everybody might say, well, that's a jolly good thing, that's what the voters want, that's what the activists want. But it's become so dominant within the selection process that I think it is deterring good people from applying because they know that really there are only a couple of places you can apply. I mean, I actually said to Starmer about a year ago, I said, the trouble with this obsession with being local is, you know, if you had to be local, you would have had to go for East Surrey, and you would have spent your whole of your life trying to become MP for East Surrey and failed. And it really does cut down the choice if you insist on your candidate being local. It cuts down on the choice for the individual candidate when they're working out their career. It cuts down the choice for the local party when they're choosing their candidate. I understand why it happens, and I can see why you could regard it as democratic. I think it is one of the most damaging things in politics right now at a time when my view is we need the best possible people in Parliament. Because as I said at the start, these are people who are not just going to be members of Parliament and chairing select committees and holding the government to account and scrutinising legislation, but a lot of them are going to be members of the government and ministers. And we need people of really high calibre, the best brains in the land, frankly, right now, given the problems we face as a world. And if all we do is choose a bunch of people who are good at getting potholes filled, then I think this country is in deep trouble. I'll end it there on that controversial... I'm sorry, I've gone on far too long.
Thank you very much. I told you he was going to be good. And just for the avoidance of doubt, other speakers, that was not 5 minutes.
No, sorry. What was it?
I think it was about 10.
Oh, God,
but he's driven all the way down from the Lake District to be with us today in the day of storms.
Well, I was coming back anyway.
Don't spoil the image. Over to Luke, who I think is going to tell us a bit about the Labour process.
Yeah. So I don't disagree with a lot of what Michael said, actually. I think there's some good critique there of what's going on. The important thing to note is this is it's an incredible funnel, the point at which you get to run in a winnable seat. There are thousands of people in the Labour Party with the skill set required, the kind of base level to be an MP. We get like maybe 5 to 10 good applicants in every seat. Fewer than that in the less winnable ones, but there's 600 and take out Northern Ireland 632 or something if we don't run against the Speaker. So you can multiply that by 5 or 10, and these are people that are qualified. They've been councillors. They've got a political brain on them. They've campaigned hard all their lives. They're ready to do it. They're capable of doing it. And we have to get down from that number to the 633, of whom, hopefully 400 might become Labour MPs on a really, really landslide day, but it's probably going to be lower than that. So it's the big kind of funnel where all the work that people put in, often for decades, into their lives as political activists can fall, just bad luck can mean that you don't get through to the next stage. So one of the things I always say to people is think about the other things you do in politics should not be just stepping stones, because it's mathematically impossible for all of us that are political activists and really want to be an MP to become an MP. The other things you do along the way might be the highest point that you reach. And the bit I didn't agree with Michael, I agreed with him about too much localness, but I wouldn't sort of deride being a councillor as potholes, because sometimes you can really change people's lives if you run a local authority in a good way, and you can really change people's lives for the worst if you run it in a bad way. Labour keeps changing its process subtly, or not so subtly. Every round we change it slightly, so it's very difficult for academics and commentators to keep pace with it. There's always probably always some kind of marginal factional advantage in the changes that are made, and people sit there at NEC meetings, National Executive Committee meetings, and they never actually say, I want this because it's good for my side of the party. It's always couched in, well, I think that this would, this would really help candidates from this disadvantaged background or that disadvantaged background. The reality, it always does all those things, but there's always some kind of implication for the balance of power in the party. There's also a bit of a joke that we have on the NEC that the faction that brings in any kind of rule change is usually the one that gets bitten by it a few years down the track. The things that you bring in always come back and work against you. The critical dilemma that we face is the balance between intervention and local member democracy. So local member democracy is very important to the Labour Party. Trying to get Labour Party members to do things they don't want to is like herding cats. They're very free-willed people that want to make their own choices about who their candidate is and a whole range of other things. But the more that you just leave the CLPs, the constituency Labour parties, to their own devices, the more that you tend to get outside of London and a few other big cities where people are where members are very concerned about diversity and women's representation and stuff. In most of the rest of the country, you get a kind of sameness of, if left to with no external intervention, you get favourite sons. You get basically usually a guy, usually white, that has worked their way up through the local party and knows the membership inside out because they've been leader of the council or something. And some of these people are excellent and should be in Parliament, but it doesn't provide as much diversity as it should. So there are various things that I'll talk through in the stages of the process that we would do to intervene. In previous rounds, the most dramatic one has been that constituencies outside really of inner London were not selecting women, so we had all women shortlists in half the winnable seats. We can't do that legally this time because the Parliamentary Labour Party is already 50% women, and so the law says that you cannot have an all-women shortlist until you dip back below 49.9 or below 50. But clearly that was restricting choice. There were people that wanted to run, and they were told you can't because you're not a woman. You can't run in the seat that you've been working hard in for decades. And there would be local parties that go, but we wanted this bloke and we weren't allowed to have him. So that's the dilemmas that face us as a National Executive Committee are the things we want to achieve in terms of all kinds of different diversity, but also in terms of how do we get the kind of national stars who we might need on the front bench, who bring skills from outside of politics, but who don't necessarily fit into a particular seat. I'm conscious I've talked and I haven't galloped through the process, but to quickly run through how it works now, first of all, unions and socialist societies, so that's things like the Fabians or the Cooperative Party or the Labour Housing Group, they make nominations. And those are like super nominations. If you get a nomination from a union or a socialist society, you're automatically longlisted. So that's very important. There's then a due diligence process, which we can talk about a bit more about what that involves, but that's scrutiny by the National Party of people's records, because Keir Starmer sat there at an NEC meeting and said, I really don't want any more Claudia Webbs, or what was the guy in Hartlepool, Mike Hall or Hill, who turned out to be a sex pest. I don't think that's likely to come in for litigation because he was chucked out of the House of Commons for it. And Jared Amara and Keir was like, we can't afford that to have people that implode on us or turn out to be kind of wrong-uns. We need to scrutinise them, because if we don't, the Conservative Party and the media will. You then, if people get through the due diligence, they're allowed to appeal if they've got a union or social society nomination and they got knocked back. There's then long listing, and the primary driver of the long listing this time round, unintentionally, has been that because we couldn't do all women shortlists, half the people on the long list have to be women. But if you don't get that many women applicants, that means we have to chop or block men who are qualified, but we have to go, there's only 2 women, we can sort of deviate by 1, we can only have 3 of the men, but if there were 6 men that were good enough, 3 of them, we have to make a political decision about which of them can go through. We also insist on at least 1 ethnic minority candidate at that level, and we're taking decisions around quality of those candidates and clearly it's a political decision. If you've got to go down to a certain number, you will be looking at the politics as well. Then there's a stage where there are nominations by local party branches. Then it goes from a long list to a short list of a maximum of 4, which is a local decision usually. And then there's a couple of weeks where you have the membership list, and I'll come back to that very briefly in a second. And then a hustings meeting where people do speeches and there's an eliminating ballot, the bottom candidate gets kicked out until there's one person with more than 50% of the vote. An important factor is you can have absent votes. You can vote by post or by electronically sometimes, and the candidate that is best at signing people up for those absent votes normally wins. The person with the machine to do that. So I've seen friends of mine that did brilliant speeches at the hustings, and they got beaten because they were squeamish about going around and getting their supporters to have postal votes. So there's a kind of having a good machine behind you is important. But I'll end on that 2-week thing. So this lifts the lid on a kind of minor finicky little dispute on the NEC. This is 2 years ago probably now. I remember the recommendation came that people should only have the membership list after being shortlisted. And I said, well, that's 2 weeks is really unfair because that gives a home advantage to local candidates. It's very unfair no one would get the chance to talk to the members as people that know loads of members already or have got access to a list because they're a councillor or something will have a home advantage. And I argued for that, and so did Angela Rayner. And then we were persuaded to withdraw our objections to that in between meetings, and it came back. So I said that people should get it at long listing, and I was persuaded that I was wrong. I actually think, in retrospect, I was right, and giving it to people so they had it for 5 weeks would be fairer and would give less of a home turf advantage because it would give candidates from outside a constituency more chance to get round and canvass the members, but there were all kinds of objections around data protection, and then the other dynamic that we've had is that the Labour Women's Network, which is an excellent organisation that helps women to get selected, has argued for the shortest campaign period possible so that people with caring responsibilities aren't disadvantaged. But the flip side of that is it does give an advantage to local candidates. I hope that's lifted the lid on some of the kind of dilemmas that present you when you're trying to design a selection system.
Totally. Thank you so much, Luke. Of course, this is where we will differ from other countries because you're describing sort of coordination problems in a single-member constituency system, whereas there are some disadvantages and advantages of PR systems where you're selecting several people at once, which sort of makes some of these issues of balance easier, but introduces perhaps other problems. Charlotte, let's pass to you and the Conservative Party. And it was news to me that the Conservative Party had adopted all-women shortlist, and from your face, I think maybe it was news to you as well. So perhaps you could include a mention of that in your presentation.
Hello, everybody, and you'll have to bear with me. I'm usually behind the scenes, so I'm not used to public speaking. But I think this is a great opportunity to demystify the selection process, because it's one of the things that in particular puts women off. It's shrouded in opaqueness, and women tend to be more risk averse. So hopefully if we can encourage the young people, just out of interest, put your hand up if you are a member of a political party.
Quite a few.
Well, quite a few. I guess some of the A-level students can't do it, but
Yeah, they can.
If you don't join, you can't complain. You have to join a party, whichever party that is. So if there's only going to be 17 people in the room, you won't have a voice. So our political system is anyone can apply to become a Conservative candidate. And we were fortunate enough after the 2019 election, and actually Michael mentioned the short elections. So our 2017 and 2019 were snap elections and had different rules to we have in a normal general election. So I'm going to talk about the normal general election rules today. So anyone can apply, and then there is a rigorous process which was established in 2020 where we are looking for integrity, political awareness, self-awareness, life experience, and other attributes which hopefully will make sure that the candidates coming through will all have the right qualities to be the best MPs that we can. And all of them will have the ability to go on to take ministerial roles if possible. Each step of the process, and there are 9 steps of the process, there are 2 independent assessors who are there assessing you, and each exercise is different, and at the end of it, the assessors all sit in a room and we all discuss each candidate. So it is a very comprehensive and robust system to make sure that it is free, make sure that it is fair, and we are definitely getting the right candidates through. Then the candidates are given a pass depending on where their political experience is, where they are in life, lots of things that go into the decision of what pass. And then the different seats when they come up are given different seat allocations. So safe seats, you have to have a comprehensive pass, for example, so that we know that our safe seats, the very best candidates are applying for them. Then the association, when it comes to the seat selection, sends in 5 members to choose from all the applicants when the seat is advertised. And they choose a long list, so much the same as the Labour Party have. And from the long list, all those candidates then go in for a selection speech and Q&A, so a combination of your speech and the hustings. And then that is whittled down to 4 candidates who go back and do another speech. And then it is from those 4 candidates the association choose which person is going to be their prospective MP. So it is quite straightforward. And I think it's, well, I completely lost my train of thought. Sorry. But we are lucky enough to have redone it. But I agree with lots of points the gentleman make. There is a concern about having too many local candidates. But I think if you think of some of our ministers at the moment who were local candidates, councillors like Alex Chalk, they are not necessarily bad people to have as MPs coming through. But I think there are other things that we are trying to do within Parliament that will help attract more candidates as well, because there is a problem with our social media, and there is a problem with if you are a candidate who are very far outside of London, that you have a long way to go to travel away from your family and travel home. So there are lots of things that I think that need to be worked on cross-party that we can do to make it a more attractive job offer as well. And I think that is pretty much it.
Thank you very much. You've been terribly disciplined on time, unlike the gentleman, as you put it, and probably unlike me, to be fair, in my opening remarks. Since one of your core interests is gender equality, could I just ask you a bit about the Conservative Party's attitudes to raising the number of women in Parliament? Because obviously, if you look at the bare numbers, as Luke said, Labour managed to surpass 50% at the last election, which is pretty remarkable. Conservatives are still down at around 25?
28% at the moment, yeah.
And of course, I mean, the Labour Party, I said candidate selection is often a hard-fought thing inside political parties. Back in the 1990s, the introduction of all-women shortlists was a hugely divisive issue in the Labour Party, enormous rows, partly tied up with the things that you're talking about, I think, about which side politically thinks they're going to get an advantage from the process, but also on sort of principles of whether it was right and fair, and also men feeling like they were going to be excluded, etc., etc. The Conservative Party has never gone down this road of quotas. Where do we stand since you're sort of still behind the curve? Is it going to happen? And is it indeed happening? Because he seems to think there's something going on.
Well, I think what we feel at the moment is we feel it's chemistry, not physics. We deal in people. I think 2 weeks ago we were at 20%, we're now at 28%. We expect it will keep going up. It is just the nature of the game that you can't make these things happen. But we don't believe in quotas and we don't believe in shortlists. We're very much the party of meritocracy. And so we will encourage women candidates to come forward. I know that the chairman released a new video today encouraging more people to come forward, because obviously the more outstanding candidates we have to be selected from, the better. And at Women to Win, we offer all women conservative prospective candidates an opportunity to help them with training and development, because a lot of the selection process is not inherent to women. It is selling yourself in front of an audience, which a lot of women find very difficult. And even encourage women to put an application form in. They traditionally have to be asked 3 times before they will submit their application. So the whole process is biased towards men. So we can support the women in that way, and we offer free training and development for all women, and hopefully we expect that the number will increase. And it's currently matching what it is in Parliament at the moment, and I think it will just keep going up. We have excellent candidates, and as I said, it's chemistry, it's not physics. You know, it is, we deal with people, and it's just not that straightforward.
Okay, thank you. Can I come back to you, Michael, and ask you, well, for the most obvious thing might be, what were you getting at there with that all-women shortlist remark? Do you think there's something sneaky going on that's...
Well, can I just say that this all, I mean, there's a group of sixth formers at the back all studying in politics, and they must find this all sort of, oh, this sounds all fair and proper. And the thing I've, failed to say in my introduction is that parliamentary selections are politics in the raw, right? The thing is full of fixes and fiddles and cock-ups and accidents. And this goes on all the time. And one of the beauties of studying this is seeing all the fixes and fiddles. And Luke's involved in some of them. He'll deny it, but he always has been. I mean, before he did... and he chairs some of the NEC, some of the panels that assess some of these candidates. And, I mean, and what's the beauty of this? He's watching the way in which both major parties, and the Lib Dems too, actually, carry out some of the same tricks. So, for instance, you present the local party with 3 candidates, the Archangel Gabriel, Harold Shipman and Peter Sutcliffe. And in those circumstances, they've got no choice. And both parties do this at the last... The really interesting seats are the retirement seats that come up at the last minute. And Luke and his friends are already cultivating a list of retirement seats, I think, because very few Labour MPs have announced their retirements in the last 12 months, only 2. And I suspect that what's going on is they're preparing a group of people who all of a sudden at the last moment announce they're going to step down. Same in the Conservative Party. And then the party high command says, oh, all right, we haven't got time for any democracy. Right, there's your shortlist. Now you choose the Archangel Gabriel or Peter Sutcliffe or Harold Shipman. And this thing about it being snap elections, by the way, that's a load of rubbish. You can actually carry out a democratic selection in about 48 hours if you really want to. And that's exactly what happened in February 74, when the election only took 21 days, 20 days. So I think we have to be a bit more realistic about what really goes on here in local parties and national parties. And this struggle that Luke and I, we all agree, actually goes on between the demands of the locality and the local party and the needs of the demands and the needs of the national party.
And so, to turn to my question...
Oh, yeah, your question. No, what happened there was there have been a number of... I mean, for instance, there was one in Sittingbourne and Sheppey where basically the high command of the central office basically said, we don't want any of your local candidates. Here's your shortlist. Or is it, I can't remember if it was a short list or a long list, but basically they were all women, apart from I think there was an ethnic minority one there. And that's happened, there have been about 4 or 5 cases there where they've ended up with a short list of all women after considerable central office involvement and basically saying to the local party, no, we don't want any of your nominations, you better have these people, and they've had to give in. And that's gone on, and overall, within the construct of things, it was probably a good thing that it went on. But there's a hell of a lot of pissed off people in Sittingbourne and Sheppey and the other places where this went on. People who'd been working on becoming the candidate for a very long time.
Can I ask you a really basic question, which in your opening remarks you said, well, let me give you sort of tell you where we are now in the process. And you told us how many women and ethnic minorities. You didn't tell us how many seats have selected. And of course, we can't know how many retirement seats there are coming for the people who haven't announced. But
you can say for both parties, roughly, because you don't know. I mean, I say I only deal with winnable seats, but I don't know what's going to be a winnable seat. And remember 1997, Labour ended up with all sorts of MPs it never expected, and and Blair was lamenting the fact they hadn't checked them out properly, and also several MPs I don't think wanted to be elected. But it's roughly 2/3, I'd say. I don't know what you think. I mean, you've chosen about 170 so far, haven't you, Luke?
Something like that.
Yeah.
So there's the batch of 94 really unwinnables. There's 30 or 40 quasi-winnables, and then I think there's another 100 probably not very winnables to go.
But what counts as a winnable, keeps swinging. I mean, things that are now a winnable for Labour were not winnable a year ago, and nobody would have applied, and now everybody wants to apply. And it's the same the other way round for the Conservatives, but it may swing back again. It probably will. But it's roughly 2/3. And as I say, but there's going to be lots more retirements announced. I mean, we're only up to about 50 retirements announced so far amongst the Conservatives. Labour had 100 in 2010, so there'll be a lot more Conservative ones. And as I say, I think there are, all these people who have lost the whip, for instance, I suspect not many of them are going to make it through, and that there will be last-minute processes where the leadership, both the Conservatives and Labour, can put in people they want. People who've been working in Downing Street or in Starmer's office. It's even rumoured that Luke Akehurst may get one of these last-minute seats.
I wouldn't hold your breath. I wouldn't hold your breath.
This is the second time I've said this in a public place, and it's the second time he's not denied it.
let me ask you a question, Luke. Insofar as we ever hear about candidate selection in the media, which, as I said at the beginning, is pretty rare, what we've been hearing in recent months is about the unusual degree of control that Keir Starmer is alleged to be having over this round of selections. You referred to the due diligence process, which sounded like it was a bit of an innovation. I mean, do you think, I guess two questions, is there more leadership control being exerted now than in the past? And do you think you're more leadership controlled than the Conservatives or not?
So I don't know about the comparison with the Conservatives. I'm not familiar enough with their system to understand it. I'd say there's less control than there was in 2017 and 19 because those were snap elections. So there was a lot of imposing of candidates.
Scotch this idea that the 2017 election was a snap election. Labour,
okay, but the selections hadn't happened in time for the election.
Yeah, you haven't selected anybody, even though your party had been going around saying she's going to call a snap election ever since Theresa May was elected in July.
Yeah, I can be blamed for many things. The Labour Party's preparedness for elections when Jeremy Corbyn was leader was not really something that happened on my watch. But anyway, whoever's fault it was, lots and lots of candidates were imposed in 2017 and 2019. I'll clarify what that language means. Imposed means the local party didn't get a choice at all. Someone at regional level, it was like a desk-based exercise in 17. They didn't even meet the people. They just looked at CVs and went, oh, he'll do, and ended up with Jared O'Mara in 17. And then there was a slightly more rigorous process in 2019, but by that stage, the NEC had a different majority, which was not my politics, so they were picking people with colourful political backgrounds. But that's actually not the norm. So Michael talked about late imposition in late selections. Prior to that, in kind of my political memory, I can only remember 2 impositions before 2017. So Chris Leslie in 2010, who Gordon Brown insisted should be the candidate in Nottingham East, and had to spend an entire day off the campaign trail to ram that through an NEC subcommittee because Tom Watson didn't want to accept it, or didn't want to impose him.
This is the man who was referred to, poor man. He had many achievements as an MP, but was forever known as the man who used to do Gordon Brown's photocopying.
Which was true. He was very young when he first became an MP in a different seat. And then Alan Johnson, who had been General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union in 1997. So it's very, very rare to impose. Michael's correct that they used to do this thing of like a superstar candidate and then two people that were utterly unselectable. We've stopped doing that. That was like a Blair era thing, and we stopped because I said about Labour Party members being very free-willed and it's like herding cats. Well, Labour Party members presented with a choice between two really useless people and one superstar would vote for one of the useless people just to spite head office. So that is not a tactic that we would do anymore. Sorry, remind me what I've done a Michael. What was the question?
Well, I think you've largely answered it, which is the Labour selection process more controlled
okay,
than
so
in
the
the
due
past?
diligence stuff.
Yeah.
Look, we want high-quality candidates that are not going to implode on takeoff. And we know that the Conservative Party has got a unit of people in CCHQ who do attack research on people that might become Labour candidates. And it's very easy because of the internet. It's not like the old days where you had to scan things into a machine called Excalibur when in the run up to the 97 election. There's a thing called Google and you can find out a lot about people and you can ask around about them. There is no point us allowing people to go forward for selection who will then be destroyed at immense personal cost to them. It will probably destroy their public reputation. Immense cost to the local constituency party reputationally or whatever, and even if they're in unwinnable, it damages us in other seats. And yes, Michael's always shocked when I say this. There is a political aspect to that, in that, I happen to think that some of the political positions taken by people on the Corbyn wing of the party are immensely electorally damaging to the Labour Party. So some of this is about reputational stuff, but the reputational stuff can include saying batshit crazy, very left-wing political things that all of the tabloid newspapers would just rip you to shreds for. And what's involved in the due diligence, we look at public domain information, like anything on Companies House, like people that have been directors and been struck off, or the company has failed to submit accounts and stuff. We look at if they've held local public office, do they actually turn up to the meetings? And have they had because you can get, people that have been a councillor, but they only go to 33% of the meetings or whatever, they're not going to get to be an MP unless they've got a really good excuse. We look at their social media history, because that is very easy for people to troll. We look at everything that's ever been said in the media about them. And we ask them to fess up, and people say confess the most extraordinary things, and we just go, "What? You were really going to stand for public office when you've just revealed that you didn't pay, didn't pay your income tax for the last 2 years or whatever?" And they go, "Oh," and we're like, "Go away and sort it out with HMRC, and come back and tell us when you've sorted it."
The fact is,
Be very quick, Michael, because I want to get to the audience.
There are 5 or 6 Labour candidates out of the 168 chosen so far, you could say are properly on the left. And even the left, parts of the left would disagree about some of them. There's a hell of a lot of politics going into this process, and the standards they hold against left-wingers is a much higher bar than it is against right-wingers. I mean, for instance, take this quote from a candidate who said this in 2009. This is a candidate who had a dispute with a woman at the Daily Mail called Jan Moyer. And this candidate said on social media, "There would be nothing natural about the old hag's death if I shoved the bigoted old hag under a train." And then, later on the same day, the 16th of October 2009, this person, who is now a candidate, said, "Considering starting my own vigilante org to push nasty people under trains. First up, Jan Moyer, followed by Geert Wilders." Now, should that person be chosen as a candidate?
They probably shouldn't. If you send me details of who they are, I'll go after them. But
well, it's Wes Streeting.
Very good trick question. Was that on the day when when his flatmate had got control of his Twitter account?
Okay, can I just say...
He's publicly apologised for it, but he wasn't, it's not as if he was a teenager at the time.
Yeah.
He was 26 and president of the NUS. And now, are you going to, I think if you're going to purge left-wingers for stuff like that, you should be purging Mr. Streeting.
I just like to say, Michael has brilliantly displayed that we as a party have the same due diligence as Luke's department has, but ours does not spend time doing due diligence on Labour candidates because the press do it for us.
Right, thank you all. Thank you. That's been very enlightening, and I've got loads more questions, but I'm going to get told off by the organisers if I don't, and probably the audience themselves, if I don't go out to the audience. And if you haven't got enough good questions, I've got plenty more here. And I would like to ask one thing to Michael at the end of a sort of academic variety. We've got Rowan here with a roving microphone, so put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Wait for the microphone. Please say who you are and where you're from and whether you're directing your question at any of the panel in particular. So, why don't we go to John in the front, because we know he knows a lot about this, and then we'll come to the man behind.
John Strafford, Chairman of the Campaign for Conservative Democracy. Could I make just two comments about what Michael said? First of all, in 1997, when we had the general election, and I think you came to my house at the time, in Beaconsfield, the then MP had been adopted after the campaign had started, and we then had to choose a new candidate, and we had 200 applications. We went through the whole democratic process, and it ended up with a meeting of 500 people to choose the candidate. So I totally agree with you that this idea of snap elections is a nonsense. And the second point, Michael, that you made was why only 17 people turned up at this selection meeting in South Norfolk. And the reason is because in the 2019 election, in the same constituency of Beaconsfield, we had 3 candidates put to us, and the members of the association were not allowed to know the names of the candidates until they turned up to the meeting on the Saturday. Wow. They were not allowed to discuss the candidates, and Central Office had tried to fix the whole thing so that the chairman of the association got the seat. But fortunately, I managed to get Joy Morrissey to come to the meeting, and I got all my clan to support her, and she won the seat. But it's a typical example as to how Central Office totally distort the process, and all these people on the candidates committee are all appointed people. None of them are elected by the ordinary members, and none of them are accountable to the ordinary members. So can we, and I put this to a Conservative representative, can we move back to the situation pre-1998 where the constituency associations were autonomous bodies, and they had the right to elect and deselect candidates and elect and deselect their members of parliament? And if you did that, then the membership would shoot up because at the moment it's rocketing down, and that's why we get so few people to selection meetings.
Thank you very much, John. Let's pass the microphone here. I'll take 3 or possibly 4 questions at once. I'd like to encourage some of the students to come in, including the group that we have at the back, and particularly any young women, if you're out there. I can see a young woman at the back, so we'll go to her next.
Right, thank you. My name's Sonny. I work in the hospital around the corner from here. Question is to the 2 people that represent the Labour and the Conservative Party. You've described a process that you're trying really hard to make sure you get the right person. What happens in the next general election, the Parliament afterwards, after the 650 members that get elected, how many of them do you think will end up having to resign a scandal? And they might be maybe 10%. Does that not make your process rubbish?
Goodness, that's challenging. So on the row on the other side, there was a woman in the back row.
Hi, I'm Maddie from St George's Sixth Form. And, sorry if this sounds a bit silly, I haven't been studying this for very long, but I can't remember who said something about it, but about kind of when you go in to select who's going to, maybe become an MP, you have to worry about how many women there are, how many people from ethnic minorities, and why does it, obviously we want a diverse kind of, we want a diverse number of kind of MPs, but surely, this is politics, surely it's the person who's the best person, and the person who the person who the people want is going to be the best MP.
Interesting point, and I'm sure that the audience could have a very good argument among themselves about this. My class always does, pretty much every year. Would you like to go first on this round, Charlotte?
Yes.
Or try and get another round in if you're all quick.
We've got our own. So just to say, I completely agree. I disagree with Michael in that the rules for the 17-19 were different, and the way that they happened so quickly meant that candidates came through very quickly and did not have the due diligence and vetting process that the new system we have that was implemented in 2020 offers. So we'll have to see if it stands the test of time, but we strongly believe that we have a world-class method for vetting the candidates to make sure that we screen out possible character traits that make them not suitable to become MPs.
Luke?
Yeah. So the internal Tory stuff,
You might tell us why diversity matters.
Yeah, I'm going to.
The Labour Party practice it particularly.
So the reason why we end up in so there's a consensus on the NEC, a complete consensus. I can't think of a single person who wouldn't want to go back to all women shortlists in half the winnable seats if the law allows us to. And I think if we're in government, we will change the law to allow us to have all women shortlists in half of all winnable seats the whole time, not to have this clause where they fade out after you hit 50%. And actually, I think there is probably a consensus on the NEC that if we could do, we would do all BAME shortlists as well in order to increase BAME representation, black and minority ethnic representation, and to particularly, we want to target particular groups that are underrepresented in Parliament. Like there's only been 3 black men, I think, that have been Labour MPs ever in the entire history of the Labour Party. So David Lammy is 1/3 of all the black men that have ever been Labour MPs. That is not acceptable. That means that Parliament doesn't look like the wider society. The Labour Party, which gets lots of votes from women, lots of votes from ethnic minority communities, needs to look like the people that vote for it. And the reason why we have to impose this stuff rather than just kind of encouraging people and warm words and stuff is because of unconscious bias. So the average Labour Party member is actually pretty right on. They're usually the average Labour Party activist is a Guardian reader. They probably work in the public services in like a nice caring job like being a teacher or a social worker or whatever. I'm stereotyping, but this is the case. Very large numbers of them got degrees. They're very well-meaning people that think that they are the least biased, most right-on people in the world. But they have unconscious biases that they're not even aware of, because presented with a total choice, they usually go for someone that looks like the stereotype of an MP, like a white bloke in a suit. And so if you don't get heavy with and actually impose some of the requirements around diversity, you just end up with a Parliament that carries on being dominated by what my wife gently said this to me when I wanted to run in Walthamstow in 2005, and there was this slight kind of tension because Stella Creasy, who's now the excellent MP, there was actually one of my friends who I'd sat at the next desk to in one of my jobs, and she was pushing for it to be all women shortlist. I was pushing for it to be open so that I could stand, and she persuaded the organisation committee of the NEC better than I did. I remember going home to my wife and I've spent £500 on leaflets and now I can't run. And my wife, who is a former University of London Union women's officer, wasn't having any of that and correctly said to me, people like you have filled Parliament for 400 years, it's our turn now. And then she went, and also Stella's better than you.
Let me turn to Michael, but if I can, I'd like to twist this question in a particular direction for you, to pick up on something you said before, because in terms of diversity, and Luke's just illustrated the point here, you mentioned that there's a lack of working class candidates, but you're also keen on opening up selection to primary kind of processes. Luke has just said it cost him £500 before they'd even decided whether they were having an all-women shortlist. So how do we deal with those kinds of diversity problems when it's more and more expensive and we're having fewer and fewer people from those backgrounds?
I'm glad you've raised this, actually, because it's one of the most important issues the cost of trying to be a parliamentary candidate is huge. And if you have to try, you know, I mean, Michael Howard tried 30 times, for instance, before he was elected. If you have to try, and it can cost thousands of pounds every time you try. And especially if you're producing leaflets and videos and websites and all of that. And on top of that is the time off work. I mean, there are some candidates, like, you know, Hamish Faulkner in Lincoln, who is actually, I think, the prime, the pick of the crop of the Labour candidates this time, son of Charlie, an amazing CV. But he spent about 6 months going around Lincoln, seeing everybody, and somehow, I think he was between jobs or something. And if you've got a tolerant spouse or partner and a decent income, and you've got the kind of job where you can take the time off, it's easy. But people who are doing jobs in factories or in call centres or people from those kind of backgrounds find it much, much harder to take the time off and do all the politicking that goes into this.
So what's the answer?
I don't know what the answer is, but certainly I think a lot more thought needs to go into this.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are candidates who, frankly, manage to get hold of the membership list months and months ahead and who systematically go around canvassing people, and not in the Tory party, no, but in the Labour Party. On the point that John made about the secrecy, it's absurd that a political party doesn't give its members the names of the candidates until they turn up at the door. That is a recipe for crooks and dimwits. And by God, your party's had enough of them. So has the Labour Party, mind, and the Lib Dems have had quite a few. But you know, why not just give it to the local, put out a press release, these are the people who are on the shortlist, and then people can start thinking, oh, is that the guy that defrauded you last year, Bill? Or is that the guy that, you know, touched up your daughter, you know? And that process would be transparency and light does actually have a cleansing effect. We wouldn't get rid of all the duff candidate and the crooked candidates, but it would help.
Right, Charlotte again wants to come in, and I'm very keen to get back to the audience, so quick comment.
Well, I was just going to reply very quickly to the lady at the back, which ties into Michael's point as well, that as a Conservative, we tend to believe in a level playing field. So yes, it's the right candidate for the job. The level playing field is therefore we help the women. So we just help the women to make it a level playing field. And we believe in role models to try and encourage diversity. So we have an excellent cabinet with Rishi. Well, okay, I'm not going to see what they're like as ministers and leaders, but a very diverse cabinet we have. So we strongly believe, and that's how we feel that we can encourage diversity by people seeing that they can be that too. And in answer to your question, in encouraging people from different backgrounds, so at Women to Win, I can't speak for the actual party, but we support women financially as well as with free training and development. So we recognise the childcare costs, the caring costs, the transport costs, the time off work costs, and we offer bursaries, as does the Women Labour Work as well, to enable women from all walks of life for that to happen. And just quickly, it's only because of the snap election that they weren't told. Honestly, they are told in advance now, and they're encouraged to go down and campaign in advance. It's not a secret. I don't quite know what happened in your instance.
But the point you was making about people turning up and not knowing who the candidates are, it applies in all selections in your party.
But they're down there campaigning in advance, and some of them have been for months before. They know who they are.
There's far too much to say here, and we have a very lively panel. Let's get some more audience questions. There's a man right next to you, Rowan.
My name's Malachi, and I also attend St. George's. Some of you agreed with the notion that politics should become less localised. I want to put forward the question that if politics became less localised, would we then not be at the risk of misrepresentation of constituencies?
Thank you. Who else? How about this man here, behind, with the blue jumper on?
Hi, thanks everyone. I've just got a question mostly about what Charlotte was saying about the kind of hope for an uptick in diverse candidates. Do you think, or I guess for both of you, involved in selection, do you think that since there's been a push in your parties and your messaging, to have more representative candidates. Have you seen a change in the number of people interested in applying to be candidates? And what do you think could you do more of, or does it work perfectly now?
Okay, great. And let's say one more. Looking for a female hand. Is there one at the back there? Yes, you. Woman in the black, well, you're all wearing black jumpers. That's not good enough.
I'm Mirabelle from St George's School. You've talked about, like, in theory, like, Conservatives and Labour, like, the process that you do, but you've also talked about, like, the cost of parliamentary, like, being a candidate and the time. So would you say that your selection processes are fair? Like, not in theory, but in real life?
Oh, you probably would, and he probably wouldn't.
I don't think it's a completely level playing field. I think that there's a lot of different advantages and different disadvantages that people have in the Labour process, and we've talked about localness being an advantage because you start with a head start because you know lots and lots of members. I've talked about potential unconscious bias that members might have that might disadvantage people with protected characteristics, and it's probably not obvious, but I've got a disability, and I kind of worry that people would look at me on they might dislike me for reasons to do with my politics as well, because I'm pretty robust in my contribution to internal debate in the party. But I also, at the back of my mind, have this sort of feeling, well, would people look and think, how's that guy going to do hours and hours and hours of campaigning if he's got a walking stick? So there's all kinds of things that are difficult, and that the cost thing is a genuine concern. Michael and I did a panel about working class candidates at a fringe meeting at the party conference. I think there are huge barriers in terms of both time and cost that give a massive advantage to people that work in political jobs and their employers are like, cool about that. Could be a trade union job, or it could be being a lobbyist or whatever, but your employer's like, yeah, fine, go and fight a selection. Well, normal employers don't do that. And there's a massive advantage to people that have access to money, whether that's their own money because they're independently wealthy or whatever, or it's because they've got backing from a big institutional player like a union. So all of these things are unfairnesses that are there, and it would be silly not to acknowledge that they exist in the system. And some of what we try to do with when we tweak the rules is to try and counteract some of those advantages and disadvantages. But they are there. It's not a perfect system.
And one of my students is sitting there, and he may remember I quoted something from Pippa Norris, who's a great writer on kind of equality in selections. And there's a fairness in opening it out so that everybody can have a say. But there's also, the phrase that she used was benign autocracy. Mm-hmm. Actually, a degree of leadership control can allow you to sort of counterbalance some of the imbalances that occur through a democratic process. So it's very complicated. The rights and wrongs here are not simple. Charlotte?
On the localism point, if you, I think the point of having good candidates is that somebody originally has to be from somewhere. You have to go somewhere to be local. I mean, so you can go somewhere and become local. And so if you look, for example, at Rishi, who definitely wasn't local, he went round in the pre-selection and he went round with vets and put his hands up cows' backsides to familiarise himself with what it meant, you know, to be in the constituency. And that is the point. You don't have to be local to become local, and a good MP will always represent their constituents' issues in the best possible way, because that's what being their MP is. So I think there's a difference between having to have someone who was born and brought up, like we found in Tiverton, was our biggest selection nightmare in the by-election in Tiverton, because they wanted someone who was literally born within 50 yards of the building, which made it really, really difficult. So I think we must stop thinking of local as being born within 50 yards of the building, but it is possible to become local.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I'm going to give Michael the last word. I'm going to throw in a couple of twists, and the question I wanted to ask you, which is of a more academic kind. The more academic one is just, can we get hold of your data? Your tweets are amazing, but can one find a spreadsheet or something which summarises it all? And if not now, will that happen? But then finish in whichever way you want in response to the questions. But I'm struck that there was a question about the number of people coming forward interested in standing. And I was also struck by you talking about the 17 people turning up for that Conservative Party selection. Is there a sort of certain lack of enthusiasm in the Conservative Party compared to the Labour Party at the moment? Is it a cyclical point that you were making?
Well, I think the Conservative Party is in the doldrums right now. Well, it's been a long-term decline, as John will tell you. Some of these people will be thinking, what's the point in turning up for a seat that we're going to lose? Yes. But the figures are really striking. I mean, in Labour's case, most Labour selections, I think, are decided by votes of 100 or 200, maybe more. And in the Conservative cases, you're talking about a few dozen. Now, Labour, of course, have postal votes, and they have online voting, and there are a lot of candidates who think that both of those are fiddle, particularly on online votes. For instance, people get passed on, oh, Mrs. Jones hasn't voted yet, and Mrs. Smith hasn't voted yet. Luke will no doubt deny it, but anyway, I think there is fiddling going on.
I haven't really got the time to micromanage things quite.
No. But as an NEC member, but sorry, on the local point, I'll come to your point in a moment, Meg. I would just say to those people who say it's really important that candidates be local, I say, okay, write down your political heroes, 6 of them say, and then ask yourselves how many of them represented the place where they were born or grew up. And the answer is not many. I mean, take, for example, Winston Churchill. He had about 5 seats. None of them were local, really, to where he lived. Take Tony Benn, who was MP for Bristol. I mean, talked to Hilary Benn about this not long ago. I don't think he'd ever been to Bristol before he was selected as candidate for Bristol. And then he became candidate for Chesterfield. And he hadn't got much to do with Chesterfield either. And yet, whatever his politics, everybody accepts, I think, that Tony Benn was a bloody good constituency MP. And so that was the point I would make on that. I would love it if my information was in the form that I could just give it to you. My trouble is, I'm working on this about half the time at the moment, and it's just keeping up with all the, at the moment we've got about 50 different selections going on in the Labour and the Conservative Party. I'm way behind on the Lib Dems, by the way, and I need help. I've had a little bit of money from the Roundtree Research Trust, not much. I was hoping for a much bigger grant, and they rejected me. I thought of the idea of teaming up with the university. Once this round is all over, after the election, I'm going to rethink this and try and get it more institutionally established. Perhaps, somebody like the Institute for Government or whatever. Try and get some helpers. But I am determined to carry on doing this for the rest of my life because it sheds a huge light on politics, on the people involved in politics, and it's enormous fun. And I find it fascinating. And so, yeah, it will be available one day, but not really from this round because all the information right now is in an absolute mess. And the only person who can understand all my notes is me. And not even then in some cases. Maybe
this is why he tours universities and does these talks, because you've got a receptive audience here of people who are fascinated in this topic, who are high-quality brains and budding researchers, and I assume that if any of them are interested in helping you out with this data, they should come over and tell us.
Or I wanted to pay them, But
yeah, on that basis. We're at the end of our time, I'm afraid. I think we could have kept going for a lot longer. This has been a really wonderful panel. Can I just say before we thank the speakers for tonight, I should remind you that our next policy and practice event entitled Can Transparency in Government Stop Corruption will be on Thursday the 16th of November. That's not next week because next week is Reading Week. If you're interested in that, you can sign up via Eventbrite. Please do follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the handle UCLSPP because we advertise all our forthcoming events there. Before everybody starts filing out without paying proper thanks to our speakers, I'd just like to ask you to join me in thanking our speakers.